Hello, welcome. So this is my feedback class, How to Receive and Give. Feedback. What is it? Why are we doing this? Feedback this is the Oxford English Dictionary version. It's advice, criticism, information, how good or useful something or somebody's work is. And why do we do it? Because we need somebody else's perspective to help us figure out how to improve. And also we're doing well. Okay, we'll rephrase that a little bit. Basically, we're gonna be talking about a conversation, not just um, feedback is actually very dynamic. It's a conversation between two people, generally with an object involved, and we're saying how we feel about the object, how we think we can improve, how we think it's doing better. There's all sorts of things that we're going to be talking about here, and it's really we want to engage in feedback so that either we or somebody else can improve and grow in their chosen art form. So, some setup things. In terms of communication, uh, online, or rather, in person is always best. And there's a variety of reasons for this. And majority of it comes from the fact that a lot of our communication is nonverbal. Not only that, I mean, just being able to look, feel, touch, and art is so much better than trying to see it on a camera. But this is not just about art. This is, sorry, I didn't go through this. I needed this class. I needed someone to teach me how to learn. And I didn't have anybody to teach me, which is why when I figured it out, I put it together. Um, and so we're gonna continue with that in the back of our heads. But a lot of our communication is nonverbal. It's watching how people move. It's seeing people like shrug away as you say something at them, or they may light up, so on and so forth. And you can't get that in online conversations. Now, Zoom better than text documents. Posting on Facebook is kind of the worst place for feedback to happen, for example, versus in person, always best. Now, that's not to say that we can't do it. The things about posting online is remembering everything online is forever, and that it's always going to be read or often going to be read in the worst tone of voice. So you have to be very careful how you do it. In person, you can control your tone, you control the conversation. To get to the next point, receiver led versus giver led. So when we talk about feedback, sometimes it's, hey, I have my little booth and somebody sees something in it that they want to give me feedback in. Great. They can start that conversation. And we can start it from there, and I'll have ways to do that. And sometimes I'll be doing a thing and I would like feedback on it, and I should say that preferably before the person starts looking at it. I'm going to assume for the rest of this class that we're primarily talking about Scribble, given that we're at Sunday Night with Scribes. However, this applies to a wide variety of skills, not just Scribble. So with the prompting, if you are the receiver, you would prompt with, hey, I would love your feedback on blah. I'm very specifically looking for blah. Um, I would like your feedback on this piece. I'm very specifically looking for feedback on how straight my characters are. Um, the more that you can give of what you're looking for, the better it's going to go. And sometimes you just need the wide variety blast feedback, and that's fine. Um, okay. All right. So next point. So the rest of this is going to be a series of flowcharts because that's how my brain works. I'm hearing like noises. I hope everything's fine. Okay. All right, so we're going to start with the receiving side. I assume that anybody who's going to be giving feedback is also willing to take feedback, and you are in this class, therefore you're trying to learn something. So in terms of feedback, in terms of receiving feedback, there's a mental checklist to go through. And the first several, if any of these aren't true, just say no, thank you. So the first one is, can I handle feedback right now? Uh, is this a time, for example, that you're sitting around with your buddies and you're painting and you want to see if your painting is actually looking correct? Great. That's a great time. Is this the 3 minutes you have to go pee before court starts? Probably not the best time of feedback. This is also about your mental health state. And it's, hey, am I sitting down with a clear mind and I am able to handle what's going to come at me right now? Great, let's do it. Am I just coming off of, I haven't eaten, I didn't get enough sleep last night, so on and so forth? Maybe not right now. Next point. Do I want feedback on this task? Uh, there are a lot of times I will make something because either I felt like trying something new or I just needed something to wear because I just need something to wear sometimes. Um, I'm not always interested in feedback on that. And that's okay to be honest and say, no, thank you. In On the other side, is this the thing that I'm trying to go deep in? Is this something that I really enjoy and want to do again? That's where we do look for feedback. Do I trust what this person has to say? Um, this can be a hard one. Everybody has an opinion. Some of them ought never have left their mouths. Some of them uh, are pure gold. And sometimes the person that you're talking to. A lot of times you'll know the person that you're talking to, and you'll say, "Yeah, I trust this person. This is my person. I will trust them with my life." And sometimes you're like, "I don't. I know this person. I don't trust them with a dollar bill." Um, and if you don't trust what this person has to say, just say no. Um, Now there are other times where there are people that we don't know. And we have to take a chance. Yeah, that's go back to your mental state. Are you open for if this person is terrible at giving feedback? Because a lot of people are. Um, and is it worth it if they have something good to say? So it's just that balancing act there. And then, do I have what I need for receiving feedback? In my situation, I have a notebook. If I don't have my notebook, I can't receive feedback. If I have my notebook, I can even receive feedback even if my mental state is not completely there because I can write it down and deal with it later. Um, Not everybody use that system. If you use whatever system and you don't have your thing, go get it. If you can't go get it, then say sorry, not right now, or thank you, not right now, type of thing. And then the last bit is what level of feedback am I looking for? And we're going to get into that more on the next slide. All right, so the other side of this conversation. Even those giving feedback also have to have a mental checklist. And this is how we do good feedback as opposed to just feedback. So the giving mental checklist, we're going to assume that we have some sort of feedback we want to give in our head. The first couple of things are to run it through some filters. The first filter is this true? Is this necessary? Is this kind? Um, and I would hope that all of those are understandable concepts, and the reason would be clear. I I will also point out that sometimes you don't need all three of those. Sometimes something is true and necessary, and it's not kind, and we have to do it anyway, and it sucks. Sometimes something is true and kind and not necessary, but we say it because it might brighten somebody's day. Sometimes things are necessary and kind, though not necessarily true. And these are our little white lies. And we say them because by saying them and building someone up, they may be true someday. In the terms of Scribble, I think you're doing great. You say to the new person after their first scroll that looks very questionable, why are those leaves green? Those leaves in period are red and blue, but you want them to keep doing it because you see that they're excited about it, and as they continue, they might become that great scribe one day. The second set of filters is this actionable, relevant, and specific. So these are about your feedback. Is there something that they can actually act on? Is it to look at somebody's work and say, oh, this looks great or this looks terrible? That's not very helpful. To look at somebody's work and say, I love that you're making the X line work, that you're meeting that X line in terms of calligraphy. And the next step would be to try to get your verticals more vertical. That's very actionable. It's very specific. And if they're working on their calligraphy, then it's relevant. The relevance really comes into if they say what they're looking for feedback on. If you don't have that information, you can always ask for it or make sure it's exact, at least on the piece that they're working on, not on whatever else. Um, and in terms of another thing that's important about this is there are different types of feedback, and we're going to mostly talk about positive feedback and constructive feedback. There's also criticism, which doesn't belong in any of our conversations. Um, so that's why I'm saying positive and constructive. When we think about the actual, relevant, and specific, all of those things should match between our positive feedback and our constructive feedback. If, for example, if you said, this looks great, and you need to fix this and this and this and this, what's heard is my thing looks terrible and I should stop now. Um, on the other hand, back to hey, I love that you're getting these leaves in and you're making these curly cues. I think that you could use more or less of them. Um, that's that's balanced out feedback. Okay. Through the filters. Next point. Is this a good time? So just like the person when receiving feedback, you need to check that this is the right time. Uh, Giving feedback, you should also be aware, is this the right time? Is this a time that you've set aside for feedback? For example, I used to be part of a painting circle, and once a month we would pass our pieces around the table and do feedback to each other. And that was very much intentional time that we would do it. Again, back to, is there like 20 minutes between now and the next court or the next fight or what have you? Is that person in armor and you're trying to give them feedback on their drawing? No, that maybe not a great time. And when we talk about the mental aspects on the receiving end, it's also the mental aspects on the giving end, because during the conversation, it's on the giver a lot for maintaining safety in the conversation. And that takes a bit of energy and uh, requires you to be paying attention. And I'll explain that part when we get to it. So then the last part of kind of the checklist parts are the approach. When giving feedback and you're starting the conversation as opposed to somebody is starting it with you. I generally say something like, I saw you did blank. Do you have an interest in feedback? And that allows them to say yes, it allows them to say no. And they need to be able to say both of those without repercussions in order for it to be genuine. And then if they say yes, what level of feedback are you looking for? And this is where we get to why there's a chili pepper on my slide. Like to talk about this in spiciness levels. So sometimes we're talking positive feedback, sometimes we're talking constructive feedback, sometimes we're talking a little bit of column A, a little column B, and some people will prefer one or another. And sometimes that person, it's just what day did you get them on? Sometimes they need the positive to just build them up because they think they're doing terrible and they'll say, just easy today. Sometimes they're like, you know what? I'll take just the constructive bits because I think I'm the greatest person at all. And so it's just important to be very upfront about what we're looking for so that we can work towards that. All right. Another brief pause before I continue on. Great. All right. So now we're getting into the conversation. So this is both of them. We've already decided we're doing feedback. We've said that we're at this spiciness level. The main part of the conversation is communicating, listening, and then asking questions, answering questions. For the receiver, there's a couple things. First one is take the note. Sometimes you will be given feedback that you don't agree with, and you don't have to agree with it, and you don't have to to do anything with it. You might throw it out the window as soon as that person walks away, and that's okay. You take the note. Sometimes somebody tells you you're doing great and you know all of the flaws in your piece and want to point it out, but the correct answer to, hey, this is wonderful, is thank you. Um, that's another version of taking the note. We need to communicate needs. If you're starting to not be able to be engaged in that conversation, say that. It's got to be okay because that's the only way we can keep good communication open is say, hey, I'm uncomfortable with where this is going. But it's also never mind, I'll get back to that. All right, then we need to decline value judgments. As artists, we put a lot of ourselves into our art. And sometimes it can feel like somebody is critiquing us when they're really critiquing our piece. And you have to be able to separate yourself from your art in order to take feedback on it. Because just because you can't draw a straight line doesn't mean you're a terrible person. It just means that you might need to learn how to draw a straight line. And that can be hard, but it's important. And then there's ask follow-up questions. So somebody might say, hey, I think you need to write these letters close, really tight and close. And I'm like, I wrote them what I thought was legible. Is that not important? And they might say, well, sometimes legibility isn't quite important. Or they might say, hey, try using a bigger pen in the smaller size. And trust the process that writing them close together is fine. But if you sometimes you'll get into this cycle where people are giving very specific feedback and sometimes they'll even say all the same thing. You'll have four people tell you the same thing and it won't make any sense and you won't be able to grow from it because you don't understand what it means. And that's why we ask follow-up questions to understand what it means. It's also, you might think that they're saying one thing when they're really saying a different thing. So sometimes a rephrasing how they said something to make sure you're understanding is a really good way of doing that too. In terms of the giver, we need to talk about maintaining safety. So when I'm talking safety, I'm not talking you think they're going to be chopped in half with a long sword that's flying through the air. I'm talking about emotional safety. And I really don't have enough time in a day even to cover what that means in thoroughness. There's a book called Critical Conversations that I highly recommend. But the gist of this is making sure that they're still in the conversation, that the receiver is still in the conversation, that they're still being responsive, they're not checked out, they still feel safe and are okay with what you're saying. And that's on the giver to hold stuff up because it might turn into somebody starts getting really defensive, and it may not be about what you're saying. It might be, for example, if they forgot to decline value judgments and they started taking it on themselves. Sometimes you have to take a step back from the feedback that you were trying to give to deal with how they're actually taking it. And then there's sometimes they might ask questions and you don't know the answer. And at that point, I want you to say, I don't know. Because if you give an answer that isn't true, well, that's not going to help anyone. And it might actually hurt them going forward. If you are interested in that answer yourself and are willing to do the work, say, I don't know, and I will go look it up, and I will get back to you. Don't promise anything that you're not going to do. And definitely follow up if you do say and. You are not required to say and. You are not required to do that work for them. All right. So we've done our pre-checklist. We've had a conversation. There's back and forth. We're all in a good spot. On the receiver side, you say thank you. Unless the person who gave you feedback was a total jerk, you're just gonna say thank you, and that's often an end to a conversation. If you're somebody who writes things down, record it, reflect it, take action. Now, 90% of feedback may not apply to you. No two brains work the same way. So sometimes you don't record it because it's not going to work for you. Sometimes you record it even though it doesn't make sense at the time because it might be useful in the future for you to come back to. And then the taking action is on you for how do you use the feedback. On the giver gets a little bit more complicated. For the givers, you have to give them space. After you give them feedback, let them go process it, integrate it, what have you. Now there's kind of three ways it can go. For if you see this person, you might follow up. You might say, "Hey, how did that thing we talked about go?" You might watch for growth. Next time you see a piece, oh, I see that your verticals are now going great. Next, you should work on curliness of this character. Great. When you can see their growth, it's wonderful. You can feel like you made the difference. You also have to accept that not everyone will take your lesson. Sometimes the lesson that you had to teach was not what they needed to learn. Sometimes how it works for you isn't how it's going to work for them. All right, and I know that we're at about a half an hour mark. I just have one more slide, and it's kind of the FAQs from here. So, FAQs. Are there exceptions? Yes, there are absolutely exceptions to this, all the checklists and things that I've given. Generally, those are if they are safety issues. So if somebody's going in the street, you get them out of the street. If someone is going to hurt their shoulder because of how they swing out on a dance move, you tell them how not to hurt their shoulder. And you don't have to go through the, hey, are you open to feedback and what spicing? No, if there's a safety issue, solve the safety issue. How do we find a good space for feedback? There are definitely times that we can set up intentional spaces. Try looking around in your local group or your kingdom for places that look intentional that maybe just need a nudge towards being a feedback space. And then making spaces. A lot of these, if you have Baroness nights, Sunday night with the Scribes, I can imagine that would be a great place for having a feedback circle. What do I do if someone is giving me unwanted feedback without asking? Look, everybody's got an opinion, and sometimes they start saying it without giving you the chance to tell them no. At that point, you either say no, thank you, just into their face, and that's fine. They already broke the social contract by giving that criticism, because it's not even constructive if it wasn't asked for or it wasn't consented to. If you're feeling extra spicy, which I sometimes do, I'll say, "Hey, I'm not. Can we go back to the point where you ask if I'm open for feedback?" And then you can instruct them. Yeah, no, I don't want feedback right now. And that might be the jock that they need to get their process cleaned up. And they might still be too hard-headed to realize that you're trying to help them in that. That's not on you. Again, they broke the social conventions. You're trying your best out of that. And then what if I see someone else breaking the process? This I feel is especially important with newcomers. I There are a lot of times where we see somebody going to their first event, and the person who's been around for far too long and thinks that they know everything that's right goes up to them and starts talking and telling them how everything's supposed to be done. Um, Generally, if you see that happening, the best thing to do is, if you can, check in with them, like do the thumbs up, okay, that type of sign with them, to make sure that they're an okay situation. If you can't do it covertly, you might break in and say, "Hey, everything going on okay over here?" Um, and remember, more important that we have a full safe environment than it is that somebody that we might break a conversation that's okay. Because we need the safety first, and then we can deal with the other parts. All right, that was a lot of me jabbering. At this point, it's the end of the presentation section. I'm open for questions, and some of these will be, "Hey, this is my situation," and I might just throw it out to the rest of the group and say, "How would you guys deal with this?"
What are your suggestions for knowingly giving feedback to somebody on spectrum, ADHD, or autism, because that negates a bunch of these
Mhm.
points?
And it's really, you're gonna have to figure out, and any person that you're talking to, you're gonna have to figure out where their intricacies lie. Um, it is definitely harder giving feedback to some people than it is to others. Um, if you can learn the process well, if you can learn all the check marks, if you can learn how to communicate clearly and make sure that they're still engaged in the conversation, back to that safety portion that I mentioned, that's going to be a lot easier for the feedback in itself. They also need to be, going back to their mental checklist, they need to be in the place where they want feedback on this task. And it might be they have to start small. It might be that it's one compliment is all the feedback they can get, or one compliment and one criticism, and you start small and then go bigger. On the other hand, with ADHD in particular, and not a psychiatrist, not a psychologist. These are purely observations. Um, if you can get to the point where they're infidump level of excited, and you can trigger something that gets them to focus on what you're saying, it can go great. Um, does that make sense?
Yes. What about kind of giving a pre-checklist of this to them so they can be rolling it around in their head, because catching them off guard tends to be a bad thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
That way
I
they could build up for this, during ever what prep time they're given.
Yeah, um, definitely. If you have the rapport built up with them, if you have their trust, I love that this is getting recorded. I know that it is already another version of this class is already on YouTube on the West Kingdom page. You might send it to them and then they can understand the process as well. Being upfront with how the process works can alleviate some of the anxiety.
Excellent. Thank you.
The reality of life is not everybody does feedback well, and sometimes we have to teach people. There's how do we deal with autism? There's definitely how do we, and there's a lot of that is an actual mental disorder, and it's a disability for a reason. We're not going to solve a lot of that here. There are a lot of strategies that I would recommend. Feedback is its own skill. Some laurels much will be terrible at it. Some non-laurels will be fantastic at it. It is its own skill, and just because somebody has that accolade doesn't mean that they're the expert. It's just like teaching has its own skill. Not all laurels should I put a newcomer in front of. Not all laurels are able to explain their process clear enough for somebody to learn it. That is not, even though we would like our peers to be the teachers, that's not always the situation. And we have to recognize that and really take the burden of assumption that every peer is going to be great at it out and try to encourage those who want to be better, and also listen to the non-peers. And I say this all as a non-peer. Yeah, I needed this on the heavy field. I learned it on the rapier field. I teach it at ANS. We need to evaluate ourselves. Make sure that we did have all of our check marks covered. Make sure that it was a consensual conversation. Just go through how that conversation went down. Maybe run all of those points through someone else that we trust. Um, Besides that, there are going to be bad actors. You can be the best person in the world, and somebody's going to hate you and going to talk all sorts of nonsense about you. The best advice that I can give you is be your most excellent self at all times.
This is a great class. Thank you for teaching it again.
Yeah, I'm glad people came and have interacted with it. Some of this I picked up while I was in an actual photography class. Um, I have no copyright or, well, I have no monopoly on this information. If anybody is good at teaching and wants to take it to their space, I would love to have it permeated throughout.